Katleho, that's precisely why my guest is Keitumetse Moutloatse from the Black Women's Caucus, to get a sense of what they expect to come out of these conversations. But of course, this conversation coming, Keitumetse, as it is on the back of what the president said when before declaring this convention open. Just what you were able to pick up from what he had to say before we talk about what your expectations are and what you are bringing to this conversation.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for having me. I think so my initial reaction from the president's address is that, number one, he was very relaxed. You know, we know him very diplomatic, very formal in his engagement and how he speaks to the country. I think today there was an ease, there was an appeal to the people in terms of even how he delivered his message, which really centered this idea around the citizen-led approach to this national convention and ultimately the national dialogue seeks to take. But ultimately, what's also came out quite strongly in the president's address is that there is somewhat of a shared consensus on what the problems are. I think throughout his address he was quite honest, you know, in signaling some of the big crises that we find in this country. You know, some of them are very uncomfortable to stomach and to listen to, especially given the diversity in the room, right? But it's important for the head of state to not hide or be oblivious to the lived realities of all South Africans.
Well, someone will say, but as the government, as the head of the state, he should know our problems only too well.
Absolutely, and I think what's coming out, you know, from the first half of the National Convention is that, as I said again, is that we do have a consensus on what the problem is, right? So the diagnosis is really fine, but I think it's the intervention that we're all struggling with, and hopefully this National Convention and the national dialogue more broadly will lead us to a common plan of action that we can all buy into as a country. Because already listening to the panel discussions that have taken place so far, you can hear, and I just want to applaud that there's been quite a rich diversity in speakers. Definitely not our usual lofties, right? Different faces from different sectors, but you can see there's a bit of a misalignment on what we think the way forward needs to look like. And the misalignment is not a bad thing, right? The misalignment just clearly shows that there is an opportunity and a necessity for us to be engaging more so that we realign as a country so we have a way forward.
But what for you? I mean, the broad dialogue, everyone who is here comes from a particular vantage point, organization, constituency, has particular interests that they would like to promote and pursue. But what for you as the Black Women Caucus is that which you believe you cannot leave this conversation without?
So I think as an organization, our starting point is that we're not starting a dialogue. We're continuing an existing dialogue that's been happening in pockets of society. But what we want to see coming out truly from this process is how do we continue the dialogue? How do we influence? How do we shape? And ultimately ensure that our voices of women in particular, voices of children, find expression in decision-making processes. Because for us, it's not just talking. This dialoguing is also about decision-making. It's about shaping the country moving forward. We definitely want to see the issues around gender equity and equality at the helm of the agenda. We cannot speak about transformation if we're leaving 50% of the population behind. We need to speak about the issue of crime. You know, I think for far too long we've reduced crime and not really looking at its far-reaching implications, not only on the lived realities of those marginalized, particularly women, through gender-based violence and femicide and the killing of children, but we also know that crime is a threat to our national security and it's an impediment on the development targets we've set forth. So us moving forward, we're saying, hold up. We're tired of discussing and trying to shape the country from the margins and the peripheries. We want to sit in the room. We want to make sure that we contribute to how this country is going to move forward. And when we speak about women, and I really want to make this clear, because even in the structuring of our commissions, women and GBV. Our lived realities as South African women is not just gender-based violence and femicide. In fact, on my way to the convention this morning, I stopped at Wimpy and I met a very lovely woman, and she really appealed to me to say, we need to speak about women's access to water, women's access to electricity, women's access to the markets, women's access to mineral resources. So it's a bigger conversation when we're speaking about the women's agenda, and that's what we're here to advocate. But most importantly, we want to make sure that the program of action is reflective of the constituencies that we represent.
In fact, that's exactly where I want us to end this conversation, because of what you've just said, but also because of what I heard someone say in that second panel, where they felt that some constituencies or particular groups of people who should be here to talk about very specific issues affecting women may not be here for a whole variety of reasons. She spoke about how she had to leave Makanda at some ungodly hour in order for her to be able to be here on time, but also taking into account that they won't have the resources to, for example, put themselves up at a hotel. What for you are those groupings that we need to look at, particularly as we seek to embark on this journey?
Definitely young women. We need to be looking at young women, the youth in particular, the youth more broadly, youth living with disabilities. Whether we like it or not, we see the insurgence of, groups like Operation Tudula. Whether we like it or not, we need to start speaking to migrant women, the migrant force, right? Because they are really part of the South African reality. We need to be speaking about the elderly. And this is a group that is often neglected. But we know in provinces like the Eastern Cape, particularly elderly women are targeted. So what we're calling for is those who are literally on the periphery. So we want the rural women.
No one to be left out or left behind.
We want those who have historically been left out to be at the helm of this conversation.
Keitumetse, Moutloatse, thank you very much for
you.
your time. Only one, of course, of many groupings that we hope to speak to for the rest of the afternoon. We've been speaking to the eminent groups and other people and dignitaries for the most part of the day. We listened to what the president had to say, and we want to dedicate the rest of the afternoon to speak to those voices we hardly hear from, to get a sense of their expectations and what it is that they are here to really drive.